Hi guys, this is gsno.com and I'm here with the Motorola Moto G Pro for a full review, also known as the Moto G Stylus in some regions because it has this little accessory bundled and inserted in it. At its core, it's a mid-range handset which has a triple back camera and also gives you the aforementioned stylus as a productivity tool. Now the price tag is pretty decent, $250, and we're dealing with a handset that also has some unexpected extras like stereo speakers and also clean software, so much so that it's one of the very few phones still clinging onto the Android One initiative. Going past that, what we're getting here is a hue called the Mystic Indigo. It's basically a sort of purple, which reminds me of the Huawei Mate 20 Pro, and at the same time it's plastic and it draws a bit of fingerprint and lint, especially if you have a cat. We have an aluminum frame which keeps things together and makes it a pretty solid device, and also a water repellent coating. If you want to talk about measurements, the handset measures 9.2 mm in thickness and weighs 192 grams. It has pretty comfy buttons, particularly the power button, which has some ridges on it to make it easier to find in the dark. The phone's edges are pretty flat, which will aid with the grip, and I have to say that it's not a bad looking design and it's pretty comfy to use even with a single hand. The bezels are a bit on the big side, particularly the chin. We also have a curved back which aids with the grip. Now, as far as the screen is concerned, the display you're seeing right here is an IPS LCD with a 6.4-inch diagonal and a 2300 over 1080 pixel resolution. We have a small punch hole in the upper left corner and a bit of a chin at the bottom. Okay, so I think it's time we went to YouTube and checked out our typical test video, making sure everything is on point, and here we go. Now, as you can see, the punch hole isn't as big as you'd expect, so it doesn't spoil the experience very much. The colors are pretty decently calibrated. I would say they're pretty realistically calibrated. They don't pop out as an AMOLED would. The screen may feel a bit too white for your liking, but it's okay. Definitely the blacks are not deep. It's a reasonably bright screen indoors. If you go outdoors, you may have some legibility problems in the sunlight. And the view angles are, I would say, reasonably wide. Now, it's a mid-range screen for a mid-range phone. It didn't disappoint us too much, and the pixels have an RGB stripes arrangement. And as usual, we performed a few tests on this device, and we started off with the brightness, where we achieved 415 lux units. As you probably know already, anything that goes past 400 is a win, and with this value it surpasses Huawei P40 Lite 5G, Motorola One Fusion Plus and OnePlus Nord. It stays below the Huawei P40 Lite, Xperia 10 Mark II and Galaxy A31. Now, if you want to tweak the screen to your liking, you have some settings and you can go here, display, and you are treated to the peak display, adaptive display, adaptive brightness, nightlight brightness level, but the most important feature is this one, colors, which can be set to natural, boosted or saturated, with saturated being the factory level setup. Okay, enough about that, enough about the screen. I would say it's pretty okay for the price you're paying. Now we have to go inside the handset and we're going to discover the CPU. This one is a Qualcomm Snapdragon 665. If you've heard of it before, it's an 11 nanometer octa-core chip, which you would find on Oppo A52, Oppo A72 and the Redmi Note 8. It's coupled with 4 gigs of RAM and 120 gigabytes of storage plus microSD. Now, this being an Android phone and a Motorola phone, as usual, you do not encounter lag, so it stays away from lag and runs things pretty fine. In day-to-day usage, I didn't encounter any stutter or problem, just slightly longer boots, and it can run games, I would say, modestly. I mean, it can run some fighting games, some basic games. Games below 2 gigs or even 1 gig will run fine, but hardcore ones like Call of Duty Mobile, maybe keep the details on a lower setting. Now, when it comes to the benchmarks, we have those here, and we start off with Antutu 8. As you can see, we're just above the Nokia 7.2. At the same time, we're beating the Oppo A72 and the Huawei P Smart 2021. We're below the Redmi Note 8T and the Galaxy A51, and we move further to Geekbench 5 in the multi-core subtest. This is the value that we achieved. With this value here, we're above the Oppo A72 again, and I should probably mention that we surpassed Galaxy A51 and A41, which is a bit of a win because those are pricier. quite a bit. Still, we're below the Huawei P Smart 2021 and below the Moto G8 Power, which I consider to be a rival for this phone. When it comes to the GPU, zero expectations, but still we beat the Galaxy A41 and Xperia 10 Mark II, which is actually not that bad. I would say these are performances which make the phone fit somewhere in between the 2019 and the 2020 mid-range phones. I also have some good news, the fact that the temperature is not affected by anything you do, so in benchmarks only 34.5 degrees Celsius, definitely no overheating, and in games 37.6 degrees Celsius, so once again no overheating here. Okay, I think it's time we talked about the battery. Motorola has a pretty good track record with the batteries, and this one is actually, to be honest, a bit on the small side, 4000 mAh with a 15-watt charge, but you'll see that it's actually not that bad. So as far as the video playback is concerned, we have 13 hours and 32 minutes, which is pretty good. Definitely not a Xiaomi phone with those record-breaking results. It goes past Galaxy A41, Redmi Note 8 Pro and Huawei Nova 5T, stays below the Huawei P Smart 2021, below the OnePlus Nord N10 5G and the Poco X3 NFC, and the cheaper Redmi 9C NFC. Now let's see the continuous usage, where we had 12 hours and 50 minutes. Now with this value here of 12 hours and 50 minutes, which is actually pretty solid, I would say that we beat the Oppo Reno 4 Lite, the Moto G5G Plus and the Huawei P40 Lite. We did score below the Galaxy A41, Poco M3 and the Oppo A72. Now the charging was a bit of a letdown. It requires 2 hours and 5 minutes to juice up the phone fully, but at least after 1 hour you're at 65% and after 30 minutes you're 36%, expected just slightly better. Now, as far as the acoustics are concerned, you have stereo speakers, which actually are a surprise for this price tag. So there is one at the bottom, one speaker, and the top one is actually the earpiece, which is pretty small, hidden under a grill here. Now, aside from those, you have a dedicated app with quite a few tweaks. Moto Audio, you got your modes here, like Smart Audio, Music, Movie, Game, Custom, and you can even tweak them with 10 custom channels, extra treble boost, bass boost, vocal boost, and so much more, and a surround virtualizer. Now, leaving all those aside, I think it's time to start the tune and listen to it. Okay, so a bunch of conclusions. I would like to say that the volume is quite satisfying, not the loudest in the world, but it does its job. At the same time, I should also mention that the high notes and the voices were pretty well represented and rendered. The bass is not much, but luckily we have those tweaks I mentioned before, which can solve the problem a little bit. So not bad overall, and actually I'm happy that with the fact that we have stereo speakers and a stereo setup here. We did some decibel meter tests, and we achieved for the bottom speaker 85.7 decibels and for the top speaker 75 decibels. A 10 decibel difference means that the two aren't equal and the bottom one is much more powerful, which I can confirm. And with the bottom value, we actually surpassed a few phones, not many, a few. We surpassed Galaxy A31 and Oppo A72. We got below Galaxy A41 and OnePlus Nord N10 5G. Games were actually a whole different ball game. As you can see, 103.6 decibels, very loud, were above Realme 6 and Galaxy A41 as well as the Huawei P40 Lite 5G, but still we are below Galaxy A51 and Reno 4 Lite. Still, we caught top 20. Now, as far as the camera is concerned, you can already tell we have a selfie punch hole singular camera. It's a 16 megapixel shooter, and going to the back side, you'd be tempted to believe this is actually a quad camera. It's not, it's a triple camera, because this is a laser focus mechanism. So we got the main camera, a 48 megapixel shooter with PDAF and f1.7 aperture. There's a 16 megapixel ultra wide camera, and it also serves as the action camera for video shooting only, no photos. And finally you have this small macro camera, 2 megapixel, and the LED flash here. Let's see what else. So you can shoot 4K video, that's the good news, and I think it's time to see how the samples we took looked. I actually caught a pretty sunny day in early January, among the first days of January, and let's see what came out of that experience. Once again, it was a pretty sunny day in early January, and let's start off with these shots. I would say that when you have a problem with the background lighting, or if you feel that the image isn't correctly lit, you can apply HDR and things will be settled pretty nicely. The HDR does its job pretty fine here. I'm happy with the texture of the object and especially the focus. You can tell we have a laser focus mechanism here. It helps a lot when you're focusing basically on anything, either up close or from afar. Now, the colors are pretty well kept in check, the reds and blues particularly, but every once in a while I found them to be colder than usual. Nowadays people want warmer colors which will pop out. Apple and Samsung have accustomed us to warmer colors. Once again, pretty solid focus, and this is actually a macro, not a lot of detail for a 2 megapixel camera, but still the feeling that you're very close to the subject is there, and that's what matters for a macro. Here I started playing with the bokeh camera on this statue, and here we go. As you can see, the blur is perfectly applied, cutting around the head of the statue perfectly without any artifacts or weird problems. I actually applied some of these cool effects, which you can see here. Huawei had those for about 3 or 4 years ago, and they're quite nice to see and pretty well applied. Okay, so we go further. Definitely no zoom here. There's no telephoto camera, and the main camera is rather modest. Even at the standard level of zoom, you're going to notice a bit of noise and even some overexposure, so give up on your zoom hopes. Once again, we don't have ultra-wide pictures because there's no ultra-wide camera. It only serves as an action ultra-wide video shooter. I'll say it again, we have pretty solid reds, and I'll say it one more time, the colors are a bit on the cold side. A few more close-ups showing that the macro camera is doing what it should do, and some more landscape shots. If you found this pasture to be too dark, you activate the HDR and there you go. Of course, I didn't forget about selfies. I actually have 2 samples. First of all, this one. I like the texture of the face. You can see clearly which of the beard hairs are white, which are dark, and you can see the expression of the face pretty clearly. It's well rendered. If you get rid of the beautifying options, you'll actually get a pretty realistic shot, and I like the focus here, how it leaves some of the background in focus and also my face at the same time. It's quite nice to see. The camera is actually a surprise. For this price tag, usually there should have been a compromise, maybe a worse camera. It's not the case here. We're also applying some of those cool effects for the bokeh, not totally blown away by them, but still better to have them than for them to lack. And here we're in the shadow where you can clearly tell the colors are totally washed out because the sun is lacking and it was going to set. Okay, so and here are some more shots, this time clearer and better rendered, and the texture of the eyes and the details of the skin were the things that impressed me the most. So I think that the selfie camera is a bit of the star of the show for this set of photos. The macro camera also behaved itself well, but don't expect much zoom and don't expect warm or intense colors. Now we're off to the nighttime photos, and here we are. They're not mind-blowing, to be honest. They're pretty typical for a mid-range phone. However, if you switch to the night mode, you'll get some pretty solid results. So the basic pics aren't much to look at, but once you start activating the night mode, you'll find yourself pretty impressed. I mean, this is not something to write home about, but this one is actually postable on social media. That's the difference. The darker and noisier shots with big halos aren't impressive, but when you activate the dedicated mode, you will find yourself pleased with the results. Some of the streetlight halos are a bit big, and some of the shots are a bit murky, muddy and noisy, but the camera, if kept on night mode, should deliver some postable on Instagram results. I find it to be superior to the Xperia 10 Mark II. It can fight the Realme 6, and I think it beats the Moto G8 Power. Now let's talk about the video capture. Okay, so it's time to check out the videos, and keep in mind that my expectations were very low considering the price tag of this phone. In some countries it even went below $200. So first things first, this is a stabilization test with no bells and whistles with the main camera, and even though it may seem okay to you, there was some focus loss and overexposure of the vegetation area. Not the worst I've seen, but also not very impressive, and in general things were rather shaky when filming, well, regular shots. Oddly enough, since I consider the colors of the pictures rather cold, the colors of the videos are a bit more intense, perhaps even too intense. Surprisingly, the zoom is quite okay, since we're working with digital zoom, there's no telephoto camera here. And moving further than that, I tried out the special action camera, the ultra-wide camera, and I mean, it's okay and all, it's a catchy angle that you're getting here, but it feels a bit choppy. The movement is choppy, it feels like frames are being glued together, and every motion of the camera feels a bit awkward. Also, overexposure quite a bit because of the sun. Now, among the good things, the level of detail is quite pleasing to the eye when you're shooting in 4K, that's much I can confirm, but once again the shakiness may be a bit of an issue. Okay, and the focus was on point as revealed by this test here. And I noticed that this camera is able to focus really closely, really up close compared to other handsets in the mid-range segment. Okay, that's that. We also have a selfie video, not exactly very impressive. At least the texture of the face is okay, but the contrast is a bit too intense for my liking. I would say that for about $200, the video capture is not that bad. You even get the ultra-wide action camera, but the low light capture is definitely a letdown. As you can see here, a lot of ghosting, a lot of noise. The street lights are a bit too intense, so definitely not something to write home about and not something to remember or post on social media. Well, that's that. So we are done with the camera. Overall, I'll say it again, it can easily rival the Realme 6 and several other mid-range phones out there. Now it's time to address the connectivity. Things are pretty straightforward. Now as you can see at the bottom, we have an audio jack, we have an USB-C port. We also have your regular options like Wi-Fi dual band, there's 4G, there's Wi-Fi direct, Bluetooth 5.0. We have your GPS available here, and we also have Bluetooth 5.0 and NFC. USB-C 2.0 at the bottom, just in case you were wondering, and the calls were pretty loud and clear. Now, if you want to talk about connectivity, you're definitely going to have to refer to our typical speed test, and we should have it here. We did a 4G test and a Wi-Fi test. The 4G one made us achieve 183 mega per second in download and 64.7 mega per second in upload, and on Wi-Fi 153 over 24.2 mega per second in download and upload respectively. This result for the 4G is impressive. The Wi-Fi one is not very impressive, I've seen better, but it's still in the okay range. Now, software wise, I said it before, we're running on a phone which is part of the Android One initiative, which means it's going to get updates pretty fast and security updates for a long time. At its core, it's a stock version of Android 10. And this means you get the Google feed here for the news. This means you get the typical carousel for the multitasking and also the option of split screen. And all the pre-installed apps are stock affair, minus the Motorola one. I'm talking about Moto, Moto Audio and Moto Note. The Moto one lets you play with stuff like Moto Actions, which are gestures, quick capture, fast flashlight, Moto Display, and also Moto Game Time with features for the gamers. Okay, now aside from that, there's a fingerprint scanner here at the back side, and I would say is reasonably accurate, even though you really have to put your finger on it properly. And I would say that's also reasonably fast. And now the moment you've all been waiting for, time to take out the stylus. And as I said in the unboxing, it reminds me a lot of the styli that the PDAs had. I had a Casio PDA growing up, and it actually reminds me a lot of that one. Now the tip is a bit thick, it's not very sharp, so you're going to be writing pretty boldly here. If you want, I want to write by milk. This is the skinniest that I can write. Of course, you can increase the size of your tip of your pen and also change the color, and if you want to draw something, you can definitely do that and save your note here. Now there are 4 core features here. As you can see, there are 4 shortcuts that are customizable. The first one is exactly what I did before. You can draw and write. The second one is a screenshot, just a screenshot, nothing fancy, so you won't exactly be writing on the screenshot as far as I know, so there's that. Or actually, turns out you can write, so I was wrong. Okay, so you can write on the screenshot. This feature I always name useful because it's, well, useful if you take a photo of a map and point it to someone so they know how to reach a certain area, like put an arrow or circle something. So, write and draw, circle. There is the shortcut for the Moto Note app, pick up milk, and then other things I've drawn or written. These are all basic features that are nowhere near what the Samsung Galaxy Note are offering, but you get the idea. And the fourth one is dedicated for Google Keep, and I'll say it again, you can change these shortcuts if you really want to. With a variety of apps. That's it. That's everything you can do with the stylus. There is no highlighting, there is no text recognition, nothing fancy. Basic drawing and basic note taking. That's exactly what you're going to be doing here. I like the fact that you can change the color of the paper, and you can also use lines if you want to write numbers or write properly, not something like this. Okay, so that's that in a nutshell. I know people are expecting more features, but for $200 I think it's enough. Okay, and I think we're about done. These are all the pre-installed apps, and I think it's time for the verdict. Okay, so let's access gsnhome.com and talk about the pros and cons. Obviously, on the pro side, the fact that it's a quite affordable handset at $200, the stylus is a plus. We got this cute looking backside. At the same time, the display is quite okay. It goes past 400 lux. Performance is decent within the mid-range department. The selfies were actually surprisingly good. If I would say that I was surprised by anything on this phone, it's got to be the selfies, that's for sure. And aside from that, I would say that battery life is quite solid, the speakers are good. We can take a rather solid set of pictures with the main camera, the night mode does its job, and 4K videos have enough detail for me. Plus, we also have Android One, which means we're going to be getting fast updates and security updates. Those are the pros. On the cons, definitely the fact that we have a quite long charge for the battery. There aren't that many pen features, the stylus features. The colors are a bit cold for the pictures and too warm for the videos. Videos are shaky. The action videos with the action ultra-wide camera are overexposed. You cannot take ultra-wide pictures even though you have an ultra-wide camera. And I would say that the low light capture is a bit underwhelming aside from the night mode. In a nutshell, for around or below $200, this is actually not a bad deal. You're going to get it definitely for your 4K needs. I'm talking about filming. You're also getting a solid night mode capture, you're getting a stylus, you're getting an action camera, getting stereo speakers which aren't bad, and good selfies. It's actually not that bad of a deal. It's one of the sleeper hits from 2020, and among the $200 phones, this actually stands out because it can film 4K, it has stereo speakers, and not many phones can brag about that. And the stylus is just a niche, and aside from Samsung, Motorola, and the LG Stylo, there is nowhere you can get the stylus from, at least at this price tag. This is from gsnhome.com. Hope you enjoyed this review. We'll be back with more soon. Bye bye.